In New York, Columbia University has extended a deadline by 48 hours for pro-Palestinian student protesters to clear the campus. The university says students have agreed to dismantle a number of tents. Police have warned they will clear the entire camp if the demonstrators fail to leave. Protests against the war in Gaza have spread to universities across the United States, with several colleges having closed campuses and hundreds of students who have been arrested. Policy analyst Liz Schulke joins me from the United States for more on this. Good to see you again, Liz. What we're seeing on university campuses across the country at the moment, is it fair to say that this seems to be a student movement beyond anything we've seen in quite a long time?
There have been a ton of parallels drawn between this movement in 1968, which was a massive student movement both here in the States and kind of abroad. I'm a millennial, and it immediately actually reminds me of Zuccotti Park and Occupy Wall Street. And while that wasn't happening on college campuses, it spread to college campuses, and it involved students. One of their huge initial pushes was tackling student debt. So this is something that is a long history of the youth and students using their voices, using their energy, and using their spaces to protest what they feel like are important issues. There's also a lot of places where this differs from historic student protests. When we think of 68, we really think of students against the authority, students against the higher ups. When we think of Occupy Wall Street and Zuccotti, we think about the average person against the millionaires and the billionaires. So what are we seeing today in this student protest that makes it kind of similar to that strong history, as well as different on where it is and who they're protesting?
And how much does this kind of activism put pressure on President Joe Biden over his administration's support for Israel?
It definitely puts pressure on Joe Biden to communicate what that support is. I also think it puts pressure on the protesters to be really clear about what are they looking for. Are they looking for something from President Biden? Are they looking at something, just a statement from their university? And what does that statement say? This protest used to involve ceasefire now. Well, President Biden has indicated recently and repeatedly he is calling for a ceasefire. So has the goalpost moved? And how does Joe Biden reach them where they are? How does he convey this is important, but this is not the only issue that is important in this election? And also, how do I tell you when I've reached some of your demands? What are we going to do together? How do we collaborate on addressing your real concerns while also still governing?
So let's zoom a little bit out to look at the impact here on U.S. politics. Obviously, big elections coming up in November. How much is the Gaza war in general having an effect on American voters?
I think it's having an effect on American voter apathy. We have young folks who are very fired up, and certain identity groups saying, I'm sitting it out. I'm just sick of what's happening. I feel like I have no voice. They're pulling back. And what it's creating is a sense of turmoil with other kind of centrist, older, independent voters saying, I've had enough of the drama. I don't see why I should vote at all. So foreign policy is never, very rarely at the top of mind for American voters. They vote with their pocketbooks. They vote on social issues. But I think what it will create is a discord among Democrats in a time when Biden absolutely needs them to be unified. So it could splinter the Democrats. It could encourage voter apathy, folks to just stay home, and absolutely impact the election in kind of these more tangential ways.
Liz Schulke, thank you so much for sharing that analysis with us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
We have our correspondent, Benjamin Alvarez-Gruber, over at Columbia University. We can speak to him for more. Benjamin, good to see you. Columbia has extended this deadline to reach an agreement on clearing protesters' encampments. Where do things stand now?
As you can see behind me, the situation right now is quite calm. It was tense at midnight yesterday when this deadline was supposed to be enforced, when there was no agreement, when we then heard that it was further postponed to 8 a.m. And now everyone here is talking about 48 hours. The negotiations are continuing between the organizers, between the office of the president of Columbia University. But also there was a lot of movement today because the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Mike Johnson, came here and met several Jewish students, also held a press conference in front of the stairs, in front of one of the main buildings here in Columbia University. The big question will now be how this will continue to develop as we see these pro-Palestinian protests swapping over to other universities, not only here in New York, but in other cities and other parts of the country. But the students here have been clear that they will continue with their encampments until their demands are met.
So for anyone who's maybe just tuning into this story or hasn't been paying close attention, can you spell out for us a little more about what it is exactly that protesters are demanding?
What they have been asking a university and also the president of the university is on one side amnesty for the students that have faced disciplinary action. Let's remember that last week the president of Columbia University decided to call in NYPD, New York Police Department. They came in campus grounds, arrested more than 100 of them. Many were also suspended. So they are saying on one side amnesty for the students and also staff members that were arrested. But the main demand is to divest, and that's what they have been repeating all over again, to divest from businesses that profit from Israel's war in Gaza. And they have been saying that the university management has not been transparent enough about that. They say that they will continue here, saying that a focus should not only be on the discussions that we're seeing on college campuses across the United States, but also what's actually happening. They want to press the Biden administration, saying that there needs to be condition of the military aid that is sent to Israel now with this big package that was just sent to the desk of President Biden, that was signed earlier today, sending military aid to Ukraine, to Israel and Taiwan. But the students here say that they will continue protesting as they see this movement spreading to other campuses across the country.
Now, you mentioned Columbia's decision to call in police, that partly in reaction to the fact that some Jewish students have voiced their concern that Columbia is not doing enough to protect them. Can you tell us more about how Columbia's administration has reacted to this?
That's right, and they've not been the only ones who have been raising the alarms. We have the Secretary of Education, also the White House, saying that anti-Semitism has no place not only in the campuses and colleges across the U.S., but anywhere. That's also what Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, said earlier today, with some students also fearing of coming to the university. A rabbi close to Columbia University also said that Jewish students should stay away. We spoke to some faculty members here who said that they have spoken to students who said they're safe here. Others are having concerns. And we also earlier today spoke to an alumni that has been part of this encampment and asked her about these concerns of anti-Semitism during the protests here at Columbia University.
The students have been very clear on what their values are, and that is opposed to all forms of bigotry, including anti-Semitism. And I think anybody who has been in this encampment for any amount of time can see that they have been very committed to that value of standing with one another. Many of the organizers are themselves Jewish and have been steadfast in their commitment to standing with Palestinians and standing with their classmates in this encampment. And again, it's been really beautiful to see these students not only respect one another in their religious observances, but also support and go out of their way to help them, observe their customs and their practices.
So, Benjamin, that is one of the many protesters you've been speaking to as you've been reporting on this story over the course of the last week. Can you tell us what you have seen there?
I was here last time on Sunday. It's a pretty short time frame that media has to come inside and to speak to people here. And that's something that's very important because as we have spoken to protesters here, they told us that it's different from the protesters that are outside, many of them quite aggressive. We also heard earlier today chants criticizing and being against a two-state solution, also anti-Semitic chanting that we've heard outside of the university, and also compare it with what we see inside here. it's been definitely a development in the decision by the president of Columbia University to send in NYPD, and that led to an increase of this momentum here at this university, but also what we're seeing at other universities that have joined. We have Harvard, we have MIT, we have a University of South Carolina. Also, we're seeing that in Texas. So it's quite interesting to see how this has been spreading to other universities, who has been able to come here to see what the protesters are demanding, how those protests have changed, how the communication is changing. We had an email sent by the office of the president after 4 a.m. So they have been very busy also behind the scenes talking to the organizers here. I mean, this has turned definitely into a nationwide conversation, a nationwide discussion with so many weighing in discussions on freedom of speech, discussions on protests within the universities, but also outside. And this discussion has been ongoing, not just from the Republicans who have been criticizing the government of not being too hard, but of the protesters on the other side saying we see the split within the Democratic Party. Also, when we had the discussions in the Senate over the bill that was stalled in Congress for many months and was finally had the green light with this military aid that was passed then by the Senate and already signed by President Biden, we saw a part of the Democratic Party also saying that a military aid to Israel should be a condition, and have been criticizing indeed the government of Joe Biden, saying that they should put real red lines on the government of Benjamin Netanyahu.
Well, thank you so much for your reporting. As always, that is our correspondent, Benjamin Alvarez Gruber at Columbia University today.